Hi, my name's Amelia, and recently I had to make the most difficult decision of my life. Even now, just thinking about it, I feel like I could burst into tears. Up until last year, my life was so carefree and chilled, and then out of nowhere, both of my twin sisters got sick at exactly the same time. I was the only one who could save them. I mean, that's a pretty terrifying thing. But there's more. You see, I could only save one of them, and so that's where my story begins. My family has always been that stereotypical perfect family. My parents are still crazy in love with each other, and me and my sisters are like best friends. I have two sisters, Beth and Carly, and they are identical twins. They're only 3 years younger than me, and you'd think I'd feel a bit left out sometimes because they have that whole twin thing going on. But they treat me like I'm one of them, which is great. Last year, we vowed to spend a lot of time together because I was going to be heading to college on the other side of the country. My dad planned this epic road trip, and a week before we were due to go, Beth started feeling really unwell. She woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, and her fever was sky high. By the time morning came, Carly started complaining that her stomach hurt, and pretty soon, she had a fever too. It was a Sunday, so we drove to the hospital to try and get an emergency appointment. As soon as the nurse at reception saw them, she rushed them into a private room in the hospital. The skin on their face was starting to turn a slight shade of yellow, and that's when we realized something was seriously wrong. This wasn't just flu. A few hours later, after a lot of blood tests and painfully waiting for the results, the head doctor informed us that Beth and Carly were suffering from a rare form of liver disease, and that it had probably been developing ever since their birth. Mom burst into tears and started blaming herself. When she'd fallen pregnant with the twins, she hadn't known, and she'd worked on a wine estate, so she'd been constantly tasting and reviewing new wines. When she found out she was pregnant, she was paranoid that all the wine would affect their health. Dad was comforting her, telling her of course it wasn't her fault. I could see how upset Dad was too, but he was trying to hold it together for Beth and Carly. They were devastated, of course, although I don't think they truly understood what it all meant. The doctors left us so we could have some private family time. We managed to calm Mum down, and Dad even cracked a joke and got us all laughing. We were still giggling when the head doctor walked back in with a grim expression on his face. My heart sunk. He looked like he was about to tell us that somebody had died. He pulled up a seat and asked us all to sit down. I could see Mom getting teary again, and so I grabbed her hand and held it tightly. The doctor told us that there was some more news, and he didn't know how to tell us. I looked at Beth and Carly. I would have done anything to make them better. Little did I know, that was about to become an actual reality for me a moment later. Turns out, Beth and Carly's disease was a lot more critical than we thought, and that their only chance of survival would be if they could find two donors who would be willing to donate part of their liver. I couldn't believe it. My baby sisters needed transplants. I immediately jumped up and said, I'll do it. I'll do it right now. Take my liver, please. Just save my sisters. I couldn't stop crying. I felt like our whole world was crumbling. And yet, Beth and Carly were so strong through all of this. They just lay there, comforting each other, whilst Mum and I were a mess. Dad got to work straight away. He started contacting all our family cousins, aunts, uncles, even second cousins. Everyone was heartbroken to hear the news, and they all rushed to do blood tests to find out if they would be a match for the twins. Once we'd stopped crying, Mum and I went off to do the tests. I didn't even want to leave my sisters alone in that room. What if they died before we even got the results? So many thoughts were running through my head. I'm terrified of needles. It's like my biggest phobia. But I didn't even feel this one. My mind was so far away, I might as well have been on another planet. The results came out quick. Unfortunately, Mom's liver wasn't stable enough to make her a suitable donor, and nor was Dad's. The doctors informed us that this was normal due to their age, etc. I was crossing all of my fingers and toes as a nurse walked in to hand the doctor my results. You're a match, he said. I had to have him repeat this because I couldn't believe what he was saying. The relief was so overwhelming that I actually ran up to him and started hugging him. I could save my sisters and everything would go back to normal. The transplant surgery would only take a day, but the recovery process was at least a month. Dad had obviously canceled our vacation, but then I realized something else. I couldn't go to college. I'd missed the first 2 weeks, and what if the surgery went wrong? No, I needed to be here and help my sisters recover. I tried to put all negative thoughts out of my head and focus on the positive. Later that day, I called the admissions department of my college and informed them I'd have to defer until the following year. They completely understood and sent their good wishes for my sisters. Even though I knew it was the right decision, it still killed me that I wouldn't be going to college at the same time as all my friends. I'm the most indecisive person in the world, so I'm surprised I made that decision so quickly. The doctors scheduled the surgery for the following month. They couldn't afford to wait any longer because Beth was especially struggling, but they wanted to make sure everything was in place. They needed to keep an eye on me to make sure my health was okay for the transplant to be successful. The slightest problem with my liver, and they wouldn't be able to do it. Every day I had to go for blood tests to check my liver. Beth and Carly were stable, and even though they have to stay in the hospital, we still had a fun time together, watching movies, and loads of their friends visited. About a week before the scheduled surgery date, the doctor called me. I was over at my friend Amy's house at the time. As soon as I heard what he said, I rushed to the hospital. My parents were already waiting there. This next bit of news was like a punch to the chest. After a lot of research, the doctors had discovered that if I wanted to live a long and healthy life, I could only donate a very small part of my liver, which meant that I could only donate enough to save one of my sisters. I felt like I was going to pass out. No one else had been a correct match so far, which meant that I was the only one who could save my sisters. And now, here I was, being told that actually I could only save one of them. I didn't want to deal with this. I was only 17 years old. Why was I having to make such a life-altering decision? I wasn't even an adult yet. Mom and Dad held me and told me everything would be okay and that they were sure they would find another donor. But I had to make my decision quickly. I walked to my sister's room, and when I walked in, I could tell I already knew. It was obvious they'd been crying. Fear pulsed through me. There was no way I could make this decision. They weren't just my sisters, they were my best friends. Beth, who was slightly more sick than Carly, told me to pick Carly. And Carly told me I had to choose Beth because Beth needed the help more. I couldn't take it. I ran out of the hospital. They could figure it out, and I'd do what I needed to do. Either way, it felt like my life was over. I was supposed to be at college with all my friends, and instead I was left with the responsibility of choosing which of my sisters I would save. The next week passed by in a blur, and before I knew it, the day of surgery had arrived. Beth and Carly had chosen which of them I'd be saving, and they weren't going to tell me until after the surgery. I was put under an anesthetic, and afterwards the surgeons were smiling. It had gone successfully. But who had I saved? Which sister? And what about the other one? I would need to stay in hospital for at least a week to recover, but I needed some fresh air, so I started walking towards the main entrance. I felt slightly dizzy from the anesthetic, so at first I didn't even notice my dad standing by the reception. There was some kind of commotion happening, and my dad was speaking to a woman who looked very similar to him, but just much, much younger. In fact, she looked closer to my age than his. Who was she? Well, that's when things really hit the fan, because I was not prepared for what happened next. My dad had got his high school sweetheart pregnant, and this woman standing in the hospital was his daughter. I couldn't believe it. As my dad explained this all to me, I honestly thought I'd snap. First of all, how had my dad kept this a secret for all these years? Second of all, what on earth was she doing here at a time like this? I so badly wanted to hate her, but she saved us big time. My dad had reached out to her when we needed donors for Beth and Carly. Now she was here because her blood tests had shown she was also a perfect match. She could save the other twin. When I heard this, I wanted to hug her. I didn't even have time to be angry at my dad because all I could think about was how both of my sisters would survive. And now we had a fourth sister, too. This was crazy. So, in the end, it all worked out. Sally, our new stepsister, saved Carly's life, and I saved Beth's. I want to say that we all lived happily ever after, but of course, my dad had a lot to answer for. All that mattered in that moment, though, was celebrating Beth and Carly's successful transplants. We could deal with the rest later. And oh boy, did we have a lot to talk about.
My name is Jemmy, and I'm 16 years old. My story begins 2 years ago when my parents and I migrated from our country to find a better life in the U.S. We were very poor. We had no means of comfortable survival and no hope for a change. So we decided to change our circumstances instead. There was no way we could afford the cost and bear with the long process of legal means of living in the United States. So we did what others had done. We became illegal immigrants. Oh, don't be so shocked. We're not bad people. I know it's wrong. I mean, it's called illegal for a reason. I am aware that it's not what we should have done, but this was crucial in our case. We didn't know what else to do. It was either this or stay home and die of starvation. We chose the better option, and for a while, it all worked. We lived simple lives. Mama and I worked as maids. Papa, on the other hand, took whatever job he could get. We knew how dangerous it was to get exposed and did everything to blend in. We were managing like that until one day we heard on the TV some news that later became our worst nightmare. The government was taking new and extreme measures to deport illegal immigrants. This put our entire lives in jeopardy. The daily deportations were increasing rapidly. Hundreds of illegal immigrants were being found. We couldn't risk getting caught because there was nothing, absolutely nothing, waiting for us back home. My parents panicked, not knowing what to do. We'd been hiding for long as illegal immigrants, and we knew that we'd most likely get deported. In the rush of things, an idea popped into my head that I knew could save the whole situation. The thing is, it was too extreme. I thought about it a lot, and eventually, I decided to do it. In one of the houses where I worked, I met a boy who I ended up falling in love with. He was the son of the household, rich, handsome, and somehow we dated. Of course, it was a strange relationship we always had to hide. We'd never let our parents know of this. They would only worry. Now, when this problem of deportation arose, I knew Josh, my boyfriend, was the only person who could help me. He was American and from a wealthy and powerful family. I knew he loved me, and I thought of him at most times as my future partner. So, maybe, if things got more official between us, the chances of us staying in the U.S. would rise. Now, I'm not talking about marriage. I wish that would work. Well, I could ask him to marry me, but I wasn't sure if that would be legal at my age, and his parents would definitely not approve. It was going to be a long, long story. So instead, I came up with an idea that was more doable. I wanted to get pregnant. Surely Josh would stay by my side. He wouldn't let me do this alone. And if that was the case, he'd make sure no one would take away his beloved girlfriend and baby. Even his parents would accept us when a baby is involved. My plan seemed just perfect. Getting pregnant was the easy part. I read online all about it, and I followed the instructions. I waited for the right time of the month, and I got with Josh. Of course, he thought I was on the pill because I answered with yes every time he asked. It didn't work the first time, so I kept trying. Until one day, the pregnancy test showed positive for pregnancy. Even though things were working according to my plan, when I saw the results, I froze in my place. Was I really pregnant? Seeing the results in my own eyes made everything feel so real. Days after, I went to Josh and told him about the pregnancy. His cold reaction was very confusing and humiliating for me. As if he couldn't understand my words, he said, "What did you say?" I repeated my words and showed him the pregnancy test. Truthfully, I expected Josh to smile widely and say, "Oh my God," But no, at that moment and right before my eyes, his face became like a mask of anger. He blamed me for not using protection properly and said I should not even think of telling anyone anything, and even if I did, he would deny it anyway. Our relationship had always been in secret, so no one would bear witness. I cried, begging him, but he didn't listen. The next day, I was fired. So there I was, one pregnant, jobless, illegal immigrant. I realized that instead of solving our problems, I had made it even worse. I had no choice now. I had to tell my parents. I imagined how they would react. Mama was a Christian. Dad was a peaceful man. Still, as his daughter, I knew he would be a scary disciplinarian when the situation arose. But I had to tell them anyway. Papa and Mama sat in the living room, tired as they looked at me. I saw how much strain they were under, and my heart broke all over again. The stress and worry of deportation were killing them, and I knew I was about to make it all worse. When I finally told them the truth, they were indeed shocked. Mama looked at Papa. They both looked at me. There was an uncomfortable silence as I waited for their reaction. When the silence became too much, I began to shakily explain that the reason I even considered getting pregnant at first was that I wanted to help. I cried and asked them to forgive me. I told them that the plan backfired and my boyfriend didn't want to help. My mother wrapped her arms around my shoulder while crying, and Papa put his hand on my knee, a tear running down his cheeks. Seriously, I was confused. What was going on? My Papa crying instead of giving me the talk of my life? They were silent for a little while, but then I asked them what I was going to do with the baby. Papa said I should keep it, that it might even be better that way. What? How could they say that? It was true that I got pregnant to help them, but it was obvious that I did a horrible mistake. I sacrificed my whole life ahead of me, even though I had practically volunteered. How could they think of sacrificing me easily like that? Days went by, and I couldn't speak to them. I felt betrayed by my own parents. How could they tell me to keep the baby and destroy my life? How could they not worry after they heard all I'd been through? So I went ahead and told my mom that I've decided to get an abortion, whether she wants to help me through it or not. My mom seemed upset with my decision, but she didn't argue and assured me that she'll help. The next day, she assisted me with setting an appointment at the clinic, and it felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. Regardless of that, my connection with my parents didn't improve, and they only seemed to be feeling sadder with each passing day. A day prior to my appointment, I woke up to find the house empty. I called my parents, but no one answered. It was strange because it wasn't like them to just leave and not say anything. I also tried to call them, but they didn't answer. I started to worry, but I didn't give it much thought. However, when a few hours passed by and they still were absent, I started to seriously worry. Could they be troubled with the police or get held by the authorities? All kinds of thoughts were racing through my mind, and I was panicking. I went to my parents' room trying to find anything that could give me a clue as to what was going on. And boom, here it was, a letter on my mom's desk that said, "Notice to appear" on it. I didn't understand what it meant exactly, so I started reading. The letter was from the government. It was an order for us to appear at court to review our resident status. My heart dropped. Even though we were expecting this, it never really hit me until I saw that letter. I looked at the date set for court, and it was for today. I freaked out. I had no idea what to do. My parents were probably getting an order of deportation at the moment. I had to act